Good evening, everybody. My name is Rod Cookrow, and I'm chairman of Agenda Alexandria this year. I want to welcome you to the Lyceum Alexandria's History Museum, and we're in quite an historic room. This room has been used for more than a century and a half as a place to have public discussions on important issues in the city. And that's why we like to use it ourselves. But the use is not free. It requires monthly rent, and that's why we charge a membership fee. So if you're not a member of Agenda Alexandria, we sure would appreciate if you would join us as a member and continue to come to our programs. Tonight's program is one we've talked about on our board for a number of months. It's about what's happening in Virginia with cannabis. And the title is, of course, Cannabis Market in Limbo. We have a great panel tonight to talk about it, but first I want to get some housekeeping out of the way. If you have one of these in your pocket, please put it on mute. It'll help make things go more smoothly for our people here in person and also all of our folks who are watching on the stream tonight, and welcome to them. I want to, in particular, recognize our major sponsors, without whose contributions and support over the years we couldn't do this. One is the Zebra, which, as you know, is the local newspaper, Simpson Development, and McInerney Associates. We have quite a few other people who are sponsors at varying degrees of contribution. The list is getting long enough now that I really can't spend the time naming them all, but you know who you are. Some people are in the room. Frank Fannin, for example, who is a former member of City Council. Welcome, Frank, and a former chairman of Agenda Alexandria. Thanks for being here, Frank. I know Frank has some questions he will be submitting. There will be some of our board members walking around little cards where you can write questions, and they'll be submitted to me. What's important for me is that I can read it. So if you remember penmanship, please keep that in mind. It'll be important for me to ask your question. And whoever's ever passing out those cards, give Frank several cards because he's got a bunch of questions. Anyway, a little bit of an overview here, very briefly. So until 2021, marijuana, cannabis, weed, ganja, whatever you want to call it, was not legal in Virginia. But under the administration of Governor Ralph Northam and the Democratic control of the legislature, the state legalized marijuana for two purposes. If you're over 21, you can have an ounce or less, and you can grow up to 4 plants. The problem is you can't buy cannabis in Virginia. You can't buy the seeds in Virginia, but you can do the other two things. As we know, now Maryland just last year legalized marijuana, and they have retail shops in abundance, including as close as Bethesda and Prince George's County. In the District of Columbia, the law is also a little squirrely because Congress has prevented a retail market from forming, but what you have in the district is a robust creative market of what are called gifting shops. So you can go to a shop and buy a t-shirt for $40, and they'll give you as a gift an ounce of marijuana or some amount equal to that price. In Virginia, though, we don't have that. There were bills passed in the legislature this year to create a retail market, and Governor Glenn Youngkin vetoed them all on grounds that he argued were not good for law enforcement, that were not good for the health, that threatened the access to maybe children, people under 21, and he didn't think the state was ready for it yet, so he vetoed that. And so right now, what we have is a situation where we have a market in limbo, and tonight we're going to try to figure out what that means. Because whether anyone likes it or not, since I was a young man, this has become more of an acceptable way to recreate. I mean, I know when I was in high school, we were shown videos, the most famous one being Reefer Madness. If any of you remember that, where if you happen to smoke a little marijuana, you might lose your mind and attack women and children. But we've come a long way in that regard. Some people don't approve of that, but nevertheless, there's this dichotomy in America where it's a federal crime. This is a Class 1 drug. Right now, retail sales that are legal in places like Colorado and Oregon and Washington State and Massachusetts and California, they're all cash businesses because they can't take advantage of the banking system. Maybe we'll get into that tonight, but it depends on what our panelists want to talk about. So I'm not going to waste any more time myself speaking. I'm going to introduce our panelists and ask them all an introductory question. On my far right, your left, is Jeremy Priest. Jeremy is the acting head regulator of the Commonwealth's Cannabis Control Authority. The agency is supposed to work on a market. I mean, right now in the state, there is no retail market, as I said, but there is a market for medical cannabis. And we have someone here to talk about that as well. So, Jeremy, I just want to start by asking you, tell us about, when was the Cannabis Control Authority established? Like, what's your job? Without a retail market to regulate, what do you guys actually do every day? And welcome, thank you for coming.
That's fair. Thank you. It's great to be here. Outreach for the Cannabis Control Authority, the CCA. We're not supposed to use acronyms, but saying CCA is a lot easier than saying Cannabis Control Authority every time I want to refer to the agency. The CCA was established in 2021 in the same legislation that limited, legally allowed for marijuana, the 4 plants, cultivation, limited possession. We were created by the legislature, signed into law by the governor, to operate as the primary source of expertise on cannabis regulation and policy. We were established as an independent and apolitical agency because the legislature wanted us to be free from political influence. Independent means we're not part of the legislature, we're not part of the executive branch, we're not part of the judicial branch. Apolitical means we don't favor either party. A colleague of mine says it means we look at each party with equal disfavor. I don't know if I fully subscribe to that, but we work with both parties. So in brief, our mission is to advance the Commonwealth's public safety and public health when it comes to cannabis. And we carry out that mission by performing 3 distinct roles. We serve as a regulator, we serve as a policy advisor, and we serve as an educator. On regulation, we're quite busy, even without an adult use retail market being established. We assumed regulatory oversight of the state's medical program January 1st of this year. A lot of preparations in advance of that. We took that over from the Board of Pharmacy. So we got to regulate and make sure that people like Trent and his company fly straight. Actually, it's a very collaborative dynamic that we have. I mean, you need to know the industry you're regulating. So that is our primary regulatory responsibility right now. When it comes to policy advice, I hasten to add that I use that word advisedly, policy advice. We're not policy makers. The legislature and the governor, elected officials, are policy makers. We advise both parties in the legislature. We advise the executive branch. We advised all these parties with respect to the adult use cannabis retail bill that passed the legislature and was subsequently vetoed by the governor. And we've advised on other matters concerning the medical cannabis program. Education, our third role, is a big deal for us. I think this kind of falls into education, outreach. I'm sure many of you didn't even know there was a Cannabis Control Authority in Virginia. Hopefully now you'll know that we exist, you know what we do. If you go on our website, you'll see we have publications that range a couple dozen, more than a couple dozen publications that range from everything from what is legal, what is illegal still, because Virginia is a limited legalization state. It's not fully legal. And so you'll find stuff, what is legal, what's illegal, you'll find how do I grow my 4 plants in compliance with the law so I don't run afoul of the law. You'll find toolkits for parents and teenagers on how to discourage underage cannabis use. And we've had increasing interest from the schools about maybe having that literature make its way into the schools, which I think would be a good thing. So again, we're regulators, we're policy advisors, and we're educators. And notwithstanding the veto of the adult use retail bill, we're quite busy. had that bill passed, I would have had to hire between 80 to 100 people in the next 3 or 4 months, which would have been a monumental task. And so maybe there's some mixed feelings, I don't know.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks. My next question is for Brian Porter, our Commonwealth's attorney. Brian, thank you for being here. And this has really to do with a follow-on to what Jeremy talked about. So where there is this limited legal market, as I said in my opening remarks, there's nowhere to buy the marijuana you're allowed to possess. There's nowhere to buy the seeds you're allowed to grow it with. So in your view, is there really any legalization for practical purposes of Virginia? And if not, how does your office deal with sort of trying to carry on a law enforcement regime that still looks at sort of major crime trends that might involve larger trafficking of marijuana?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation to be here. Some people in the room might not know what the Commonwealth's attorney does. So I'm the state's attorney or the district attorney for the city of Alexandria. So it's an elected position. I've been in the office for something like 23 years. I was a police officer before I was the prosecutor. So I've been around for a long time. To answer your question, the black market of marijuana sales still exists. And there are some significant multi-state organizations that my office has encountered over the years. For instance, we currently have a 20-count or 20-co-defendant racketeering case that involved a black market marijuana organization. All 20 of the co-defendants have been convicted of racketeering. There were 4 that have been alleged to have conspired to commit a homicide that occurred in the city, and I can't really comment on that because that case is pending trial in June. But the allegation is that it was related to that large, very large-scale, complicated, complex organization. So we're still seeing larger-level marijuana dealing cases, and I have tried to explain to my friends in the legislature that from my position, it really doesn't matter what you're selling. If you're selling it illegally and can make illegal money from it, you're going to be incentivized to use self-help and violence to protect your illegal gains. And so there were a lot of guns involved in this case that I was talking about, and it really doesn't matter that you're dealing fentanyl or marijuana. If it's illegal and you're making illegal money, we're going to have a problem because you can't call the police to protect yourself from robberies. With regard to the smaller level cases, we really have not seen the police department charging any cases for simple possession. If you have more than, I might not know the exact regime, but if you have more than an ounce, I think it's a civil violation, and if second offense, it might be a class 3 misdemeanor. I know if you're under the age of 18 and you possess, it's a civil violation, a $25 fine. We haven't really seen any possession cases charged recently. So my office has been focused more on the larger level drug dealing operations that usually involve multi-state trafficking.
If I could clarify one thing that both of you have said. So I want to make clear the 1 ounce limitation. That is a public possession ceiling. In your home, as long as you have no intent to distribute, you can have as much pot as you want. It started out that 1 ounce applied in your private residence as well as publicly, but what happened was people said, I don't even have to have a particularly green thumb with 4 plants to grow more than 1 ounce. So the law was in conflict, so the legislature removed the 1 ounce ceiling for private possession in your home. I would also say though, if you have an intent to distribute and you're in possession of less than an ounce, you're at legal risk. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Jeremy, just add one important point.
This is Bob Nealon, who is a local Alexandria attorney who has a very long and deep sort of involvement with marijuana not personally, but I mean, legal cases.
Hey, don't threaten me, pal.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Ryan. So, yeah, I'm an attorney. I actually saw marijuana once in college. I saw somebody sniffing on it. I didn't really know what it was at the time. I didn't know what it was, but since I've been practicing for many years. But I will have to say, Rod and I are pretty close to the same age. I think he's a little older than me. But I was in high school freshman year.
5 months, maybe.
McQuaid Jesuit High School, upstate New York, Rochester. Reefer Madness was the second day in high school. And it was prominently shown as one of the first things we learned in high school. Now keep in mind, this was 1969, and it was a different era, but Reefer Madness is still a legendary movie, but now it's like a cult movie.
I want to return to Brian really quick, because you mentioned the police aren't charging smaller cases. Is that entirely their decision, or do you collaborate with them in deciding sort of where to put law enforcement resources generally?
No, well, I have no role to play in what the police department does. So the police department doesn't work for me, and I really don't want to speak for Chief Pedroso and the police department. I can say, as a former police officer, police officers are not immune from the political climate, and I think that they probably have been incentivized to not enforce lower level cases for fear of, appearing on the evening news in a handheld video from a camera or something. Yeah. So I don't want to speak for them, but to answer your question, I don't have any role to play in initial charging decisions or how they allocate their resources.
Just to let our members know and our viewers know that we did ask the acting police chief to be here tonight, but he had another engagement, so he couldn't be here to talk about this. And the reason I wanted that question addressed is because I've heard from more than one person that you can go to legitimately open shops in Alexandria and elsewhere, Fairfax County, and they're selling marijuana essentially under the table because there's no enforcement of those sort of small sales. So maybe we'll get to that. Our last guest I want to introduce is Trent Wolovic. Trent works for a company called Jushi, sushi with a J, and they are the owner and operator of the Beyond Hello medical cannabis franchises. I think there are 5 of them in Northern Virginia? Right. Six. Okay, so Trent has a long professional background in sort of different state efforts to offer cannabis for sale. So in Virginia, if you are afflicted with cancer or chronic pain or diabetes or glaucoma, you can get essentially permission from a doctor or nurse practitioner to go to one of these stores and acquire a limited amount, I think, of medical cannabis for treatment of whatever is wrong with you. I know when we were doing a call before to get ready for this panel, I think, Trent, you told me that only about 1% of Virginia residents take advantage of medical cannabis, where in some states it's as high as 5% or more. So if you could just describe a little bit about what your company does and who your customers are, and what makes them, I don't know, different than someone interested in just recreational cannabis?
Yeah, sure. And pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to always talk about cannabis, because when I joined the industry back in 2009 out in Colorado, something like this would have never happened. So thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and everybody here that wants to be continually educated about the plan itself. And so for Jushi, we're a multi-state operator, meaning we operate in multiple different states. Virginia is one of the 7 states that we operate in. Here we are vertically integrated. So what does that mean? It means we have a facility down in Manassas, Virginia, that cultivates cannabis. We process, dry, cure that cannabis plant, and then we can do one of 2 things. We can turn that into a finished product, so anything from an eighth up to an ounce, or a pre-roll joint, or multiple different outlets based on how a consumer wants to consume cannabis, or with some of the extra biomass that we would have, or the flower material, we could extract that, meaning we pull out the terpenes and the cannabinoids. We then turn that into an oil. From there, we can turn that into multiple different things, but vaporization is a big piece of that. Infused products are a big piece of that. So anything from a vaping apparatus to a chocolate bar we make out of that facility. And then once we have that product that's ready to go to the patient, we then get that third party independently tested so that we can verify that there's no mold or yeast or heavy metals. We also know exactly what the makeup is of the cannabinoid profile, the terpene profile is. So we talk about consumer safety, we talk about public health, public safety. Those are all essential to us as a regulated industry. And so we want to be part of that process. All that while, by the way, we're tracking and tracing every single plant that's in our facility, every single pound of product that's being transported. And so that's called seed to sale tracking. Therefore, we don't have any product diversion out of our facility. If, God forbid, something ever happens with a patient of the product that they're consuming, we can trace that all the way back. We know the batch number. We can alert other patients to make sure they're aware of the adverse reaction. Luckily, we've never had anything like that. I don't expect to have anything like that. I don't want Jeremy to be mad at me. So, we're working through that. We always work through that. So then once that product's ready, been validated by that third-party lab, we ship that to either one of our 6 stores here in Northern Virginia or to one of the other 3 pharmaceutical processors across the state. You then, as a patient, are able to walk into the store, have that doctor recommendation. You validate that you're over the age of 21. I let you into the sales floor. We have a pharmacist on staff 24/7, 365. So if you have questions about how cannabis, you should consume cannabis or how it will react to you, we have a pharmacist on staff from that education perspective, which is something really cool and unique for Virginia. Personally, I love it as a business owner. And so, we then dispense cannabis and a patient is able to consume that cannabis knowing that they have a standardized product, a third-party tested product, and, aren't going to get in trouble for having cannabis and consuming cannabis.
So Trent, your quality control regime makes it impossible for something like fentanyl to be laced. And because there's a lot been written about one of the ways fentanyl is being used and distributed as an adjunct to.
Correct. I will say there is a 0% chance that fentanyl or any other narcotic for that matter. I heard there's something even worse than fentanyl out there now, like 10 times as strong as fentanyl. So that's uber scary. And so there is a 0% chance that would ever get into any of our products. I can't say that for the CBD, the THCA, the hemp-derived cannabinoids, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, a lot of the times, our industry, the cannabis industry, the regulated cannabis industry, gets lumped into that broader picture, and then we get penalized for that. The other thing I would say that is a 0% chance of happening. I actually had a legislator complain to me about this when he was complaining about a young kid having cannabis. So I have to laugh about it a little bit. Last week in Pennsylvania, different state, but same idea. At our store, he was trying to get in because he had a hearing that he wanted to learn more about cannabis. He didn't let anybody know. He just went. He's not a medical patient. He couldn't get in. We turned him down. This gentleman was 55, 60 probably. And so his whole gripe has been about age gate. I think one of the reasons we got a veto here in Virginia was because we don't want proliferation to kids. It's actually the complete opposite. You get checked your ID 3 times in my store before you can purchase your medical cannabis. Same process if there were an adult use market. And so I find it extremely hard. It would be extremely hard, 0% chance that would happen as well. And so
Trent, here's a logical follow-on question that maybe it's the most important one tonight. How do you become a medical buyer in Virginia? I mean, what are the criteria? What qualifies as something that will allow you to be certified, and who does the certification for you?
I am not marketing. I am merely educating folks. But there's, I believe, channels on the CCA website that you can go and find a registered practitioner to be able to go see chronic pain. There's a list of attributes that you need to have or conditions that you need to have. No? You can just... Yeah.
No. In Virginia, for the longest time, you had to have a specified condition that you had to suffer from which you were seeking relief, to be certified as a medical cannabis patient. To streamline the program, they eliminated the pre-existing conditions that you had to satisfy. So now it's a simple process whereby a registered medical practitioner writes a certification that says the patient can benefit from taking medical cannabis. It's very straightforward. It's not encumbered by any conditions that you have to meet. Some people say that that's too streamlined. I think that because you don't have an adult use retail market, you have both medical cannabis patients in the medical cannabis program, and you have people who reasonably would not really be qualifying as medical cannabis patients because it's the only retail spot, and they want access to regulated product for all the reasons Trent alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd add on that is the other unique thing that Virginia has done has allowed you to not actually be required to go in and physically see a doctor, make an appointment. You're able to do that online still, and so there's channels to be able to do that. And so in working in concert with the Cannabis Control Authority and the legislator, quite frankly, we've done cleanup over the last 5 years now. That's become a pretty streamlined process to be able to come into the medical cannabis program.
Another user-friendly aspect of the program is if you are a patient suffering from pain, cancer, the effects of cancer treatment, and you are not in a position to go to Trent's medical dispensary, you can have a registered agent do that for you. So not somebody with the certification per se to be consuming the medical cannabis herself, but somebody who would be your representative and your agent, and they would procure the cannabis for you and get it to you.
Sorry, just one more thing on just to piggyback off of that. There is a delivery option as well that we provide. That's a very unique thing for a medical cannabis program. So that's another option as well.
Okay, this next question maybe should be best answered by Brian Porter and Bob Nealon, because it touches on a little bit on law enforcement, I think. There's been a lot written about the fact that marijuana strains these days is a lot stronger than it was in the 1960s and 70s, and maybe that makes it sort of a more attractive product for illegal trafficking. First of all, is that something that's true, and does it matter, the strength, really?
I'll take that. So, I've been practicing since 1984 in Alexandria, and one of the aspects of what we do in our practice is, and I've got 7 attorneys, we try to be educators, particularly with the younger people, and I think I bring some experience. With the gray hair, you get a little experience. And when we get someone who's got their first incident and they're dealing with the justice system, try to explain to them a little bit about what they're dealing with. And I think the intensity level of the marijuana product, cannabis products today it's alarming, I believe. Not that in the 70s and 80s it wasn't also potentially a problem, but now with the potential of there being a lace product fentanyl, other compositions in the whatever source they get it from. You don't know where it's going to lead. And I think one of the great features of cannabis regulation and having potential retail is these young people don't get their first contact with the cannabis market through some sort of dealer or some criminal activity. They go to a regulated facility, and I think the entryway allows the regulation to control the intensity level. I think this is a huge benefit which is really overlooked, and Jeremy probably is a better expert on this than I, but I've been involved for a long time. And I've actually had cases in other states, including Pennsylvania and Colorado. And so I know where it can lead, but I think that trying to prevent the retail cannabis market from coming into our state is a huge mistake, both from a cultural standpoint, but also as a commercial standpoint, because I think there's huge revenue potential, but it's got to be balanced with the social harm. So to get to your point, there's potential for real harm if it's not regulated, and some of these drugs that come in to our community change lives permanently for the worst. And as a firm that also is involved with the business side, but we deal with a lot of the younger people, not just drugs and marijuana, but alcohol. It's potential for us to do some good if the regulations and the retail merchandising and sale is also coupled with the education. I think, Jeremy, that's a large part of what you're doing, correct?
Yeah, I would say that.
Say, Jeremy, before you answer that, I want to get Brian Porter's take on that same question. But also, Brian, when you answer that, can you talk about when this whole issue was under discussion just a few years ago, did the Commonwealth's attorneys in the Commonwealth reach some kind of consensus for reasons that Bob articulated, that maybe a regulated market is better and safer than, I mean, in other words, how did people in your profession feel about this effort by the legislature to legalize marijuana?
Well, to your first point, I was alive in the 70s, but I don't really know the THC percentages for marijuana back then. But anecdotally, I've heard that they're much higher now, and the certificates of analysis that I've seen in some of our cases would tend to support that. So I do think, anecdotally at least, that the concentration is, overall more concentrated and a little bit higher level than it was in the past through selective breeding and strains. As far as the Commonwealth's attorneys go, so what's interesting about the Commonwealth Attorneys Association is there's 120 elected Commonwealth attorneys in Virginia. Most of them are less than 5 attorneys in size. There are a couple that are still 1 attorney. And so basically our association is a political caucus of the entire spectrum, from the far left to the far right. And that makes the association relatively conservative with a small c, and that it's hard to get a consensus for huge change. So when the original bill was brought forward in 2020 to have some legalization of marijuana products, I think our association took no position on it. I can't really speak for the association, to be inappropriate, but what I can tell you is I think there's a general consensus among my colleagues. We're worried about the black market. We want a regulated industry if we're going to have legalization, so we can hopefully, with time, erode that black market and take away the incentive for guns and for violence to protect illegal gains. I know I definitely am completely in favor of that. And so right now we have this kind of impasse, Rod, where we have some limited legalization, but no way to legally purchase or possess it, or purchase it or get the seeds to produce it.
Let's talk about the money involved with for a while. There was, I guess, Bob, you mentioned earlier on that there's some sort of lost opportunity cost here for the state in terms of revenue. I know that Trent, you and I talked about the fact that the black market, you said, is $2.4 billion, and is that in the state or nationally? In the state. I mean, Jeremy, I'm guessing
The range is 2.4 to 3 3 billion.
And I mean, right now, obviously, there's a little bit of tax collected on medical marijuana, but it's a fairly small, like 4 or 5%. No. No tax.
No tax.
Okay. Why is that?
It's a medicine.
It's a medicine. They don't want to erect a further barrier to access.
Okay. Well, okay. So under the scenario where there might be a retail market for adult use, I mean, what kind of revenue is the state foregoing here in terms of tax revenue? Because that was one of the initial arguments, I think, to have a retail market was to provide tax revenue.
Yeah, so I'll comment on that one. Yeah. Well, I'm just going to do back in the napkin math. Jeremy's much more precise than I am. And so we passed the legislator passed a bill that I believe laid out a tax of 11.625. I'm just going to call it 10 so I can do my mental math on the stage and not look too crazy. But if we take his number of $3 billion of the illicit market, and 10% of $3 billion is $300 million, I mean, that's a big number. That's nothing to sneeze at. Now in Colorado, I'll be the first to say I had one of the 10 licenses that started to sell adult use on 1114 out there. We didn't capture the illicit market day one 100%. That took us a couple years. And so, but we were playing in a different ball game back then. Very different rules and regulations, capital markets, access to capital, so on and so forth. But we eventually got there. Like today, Colorado is 95% purchased through the regulated market. And so, you're not going to get the 300 million overnight. You're going to step up to that. My estimate, I think, we would be something around 150 to 200 million bucks overnight if the adult use market was to be turned on May 1st of 2025, which was the date the governor vetoed.
So drill down for me, Trent, on the other side of the money issue. So what is somebody who's using medical cannabis? What are they limited to, first of all, per month, and how much are they generally spending? I mean, what's their outlay like versus if they're using sort of traditional pharmaceuticals for the same condition?
Yeah. So here's the scary thing in my mind. As a patient, as a consumer, I have to carry cash around with me because I can't use a credit card. I can't use a debit card. There is no cannabis rails to use that. And so, you're a target there. You walk out of my dispensary, you have live product. You're a target there. And then all my dispensaries, it's all cash transactions. And so therefore, we carry a lot of cash. Fortunately for us, we're a publicly traded company. And so there are some local banks, state chartered banks that'll work with us. We don't commingle funds between revenue generated from the sale of plant with other ones. So we help them know their customer a little bit better. And so, lucky for us, we get pickups every couple times a week. So we're not sitting there with loads and loads of cash, but there are other operators, maybe not in Virginia, but across the country that literally I was carrying backpacks into the state capitol to pay my taxes to the state with hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the crazy thing is the state was depositing into Bank of America. I don't have that option. And so there's a lot of public safety and public risk due to the nature of dealing in cash.
This is a real concern. And I got a couple anecdotes I can share with you that will give you a sense of how tentative or how reluctant financial institutions are to deal with this industry or the regulator because they fear of being ensnared by federal law. When we were created, the people who were trying to get the agency off the ground, this is before I was hired, so in the fall of 2021, wanted to get an EIN, an employee identification number for the agency. from the IRS. Couldn't do it. It required Governor Northam to intervene and call the IRS headquarters and say, we got an agency. We're going to have employees. We need an EIN if you want them to pay taxes. Separately, in Virginia government, for small purchases, you have what is known as a P card, which is a credit card. If you're going to take a train to New Jersey to visit with regulators there and compare notes, for example, you use the P card. After 20 months, we finally got our P card. After being turned down by banks with whom I'm confident many of you bank with. The funny thing is that we got turned down by a bank, and that actually provides a P card for the Massachusetts regulator, but they turned us down for, I guess it was different people. You would think they would have the same standard. But these are the kinds of obstacles you encounter when you're trying to have a well-regulated business. It's comical if it didn't bring me to tears. I ended up floating, at one time I had floated almost $10,000 to the agency to be reimbursed. I got reimbursed, but because we didn't have a credit card that we could use.
This question, I think, might be best addressed by both Jeremy and Brian. So there's been a long-standing concern by people who don't favor the use of marijuana that when it's legal, the gateway drug argument becomes even more powerful because it's easy to get. And that it leads to greater addiction problems and maybe people moving on to harder class one drugs. For the CCA, you mentioned education is a lot of what you do. How do you sort of responsibly address those concerns, which are shared probably by lots of people in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, another one that people throw out as well is that the incidence of driving while high increases. And I think there's evidence to support that does happen, at least in the shorter term. Education's important. If you go on our website, you can download materials regarding cannabis use disorder, which is addiction to cannabis. It happens. Addiction to cannabis is a real thing. It doesn't happen to everybody. It happens to a small portion of consumers, as does alcoholism. And nobody's talking about going back to an era of prohibition with respect to alcohol. It does require education. And I think there's a broad consensus, too, that underage consumption is not good. I don't think any of us would say that people under 21 should have access to cannabis. And in fact, they're kind of pushing the age up to 25 in the view of the medical community, because they've now determined it's really till you're 25 where your brain is still developing. And cannabis, it's kind of a, there's not enough research done yet to fully understand what the risks are, the health risks are. And the health risks, there does seem to be some troubling evidence, back to your point, that the health risk can be greater with these higher concentrations of THC. That remains to be determined. I do think it's education. Once you regulate it, once you bring it in-house, you have a better chance of educating. You have a better chance of informing people the way to use this drug responsibly. On the issue of safe driving and driving under the influence of cannabis, we were asked by the legislature when we were created, when cannabis was legalized, they recognized that in other states, the incidence of driving under the influence of marijuana, cannabis-impaired driving, goes up. So we were tasked to do a safe driving campaign, and we've been at it for the last 15 months. We did a study of attitudes first. We canvassed Virginia drivers, And there were some alarming results. There were some people who thought, almost 1 out of 3 thought it made them a safer driver. It's not something you want to think about when you're driving on I-95 or I-81, but that's what people thought. Some people are nervous to drive on interstates, so they might think that it calms them down as they drive 30 miles an hour on an interstate highway. But so we have a campaign going, and we have a campaign going on to discourage underage cannabis use. So I do think the concerns are valid, the concerns are real. If they're not addressed, you run the risk of public health problems. But I think that they're more readily addressed in a regulated industry than outside of the regulated industry. The one other thing I will point out, this issue of access of minors to cannabis. Recently, the Washington State did a study of this, and they determined that cannabis use among minors actually went down post-legalization. More recently, the American Medical Association, not a bunch of leftist mavericks, not a free the plant crowd, also arrived at the same conclusion in a multi-state study that when there was a retail option created in a state, access to cannabis went down for minors. And that's because of the very rigorous roadblocks to gaining access to it in retail stores, and the fact that when you create a retail market, the illicit market is eroded.
So Brian, do you agree with that last statement that a legal market may erode an illicit market, but also in terms of the gateway drug argument, and especially as we talked about cannabis maybe being stronger now than it was, do you find that people you're looking at to prosecute for black market, large-scale cannabis sales are also involved in the harder drugs, up to fentanyl?
Well, I think, first of all, I do agree that if we could have a regulated market, that it would erode the illicit market. I also agree that's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of money that can be made right now, and it's, I think, to a large extent, if you want to deal drugs illegally, you're probably smart to focus on marijuana, because it's easier to divert from large-scale fields in California, where much of our large-scale organizations get their marijuana sourced from, and the federal government is less likely to bring criminal prosecutions if it's just marijuana. But to be quite frank, I mean, I have seen over the course of my career some organizations that are entirely illicit marijuana and some that sell primarily illicit marijuana but also will dabble in other narcotics, cocaine, fentanyl, and heroin. So it really depends on the case. With regard to the gateway drug, I don't really think that I'm competent to talk about that. I think it's a legitimate concern. I definitely know from talking to citizens that there are 3 main concerns that I've heard from Alexandria citizens, and we've already hit on 2 of them. One of them is public consumption. Some people really don't like the idea of walking on King Street and being confronted with the odoriferous emanations of a cloud of smoke. And then you've got driving under the influence. That's a real thorny issue for us as prosecutors because the legislature has been unable to agree on a per se level of THC in one's blood that could, like you have a 0.08 for blood alcohol content, and it's a difficult question. It's a medically difficult question as to what level you would be impaired. But it would be very useful for us if we had some per se number, because otherwise we're stuck with kind of like medical testimony about whether somebody was impaired. And then the third big thing we've hit on is access by juveniles and people under the age of 21. And I do think there's some risk, of course, if someone starts using drugs at a young age, they start with marijuana. But I also think it might be a little bit too much to assert that it's a likely path forward, that it's a gateway drug. So I'm not completely discounting it. I just don't really feel competent. I haven't seen a study, and I haven't done my own research on that at this point.
So could the CCA set a level of THC that, no?
That would have to be done by the legislature, and it's a real, as he suggested, it's a real thorny issue because the metabolism of THC, the psychoactive element of cannabis, is a lot different than alcohol. I mean, there's 0.08 reflects a lot of research showing that people, as a general matter, with that level and higher, are impaired. The problem with THC, depending on your metabolism rate, you could have THC in your system, including kind of at high levels, days, weeks after you consumed it. And it's therefore been very difficult to arrive at that per se number. I do think, I mean, there's a lot of technology under development. I do think we will probably get there with technology, or at least get closer to what we have with blood alcohol content. But it's going to take a while, for sure. I also would second what Brian said about the odoriferousness of cannabis. I think I hear more complaints about that from Virginia state legislators than anything else, including some pretty funny stories. But I've long thought that the first grower who creates a non-odoriferous strain of THC is going to make bank.
Brian, you don't see cases coming before you of local police picking up people on the street for smoking a joint and smelling the place up, or, I mean, that doesn't happen? No.
I'm not personally down in General District Court. I basically push papers around a desk now. That's my day job. But in preparation for this, I did look into it. So first of all, it's basically it's a civil violation, right? If it were charged, it's a ticket. One of the things that's unusual about it, and I don't want to get too down in the weeds, but one of the things that's really rankled, that was a joke, rankled the police department is if you read the code, if someone is in violation of the public possession code section, it says they shall be issued a summons. And that means something to the police. It's like a traffic ticket, right? And there's a whole code section that talks about how they're supposed to do it, and you have to actually sign the ticket, but it's not an admission of guilt, it's just a promise to appear. The legislature, shockingly, did not anticipate this, and so all it says is a summons shall be issued, but it does not say the process or the procedure. So what happens when that goes down is the police department asks me, and they're like, what is the answer? And my answer is, I don't know the answer to that. And then they're kind of stuck in a limbo where, what do they do if they go to give somebody a summons and the guy crumples it up and throws it on the ground and says, screw you, do they arrest them? Do they go hands-on, as they would say? So it's a very complicated issue, and I think some of that lack of clear guidance from the legislature has created a limbo for the police, where they don't feel comfortable enforcing the few public consumption laws or public possession laws that are on the books. So we don't. To answer your question, no. I mean, no one's going to jail for any type of simple possession.
Okay, that's fair. I'd like to talk a little bit about what a retail market may someday look like, because it seems to be that the train's moving down that track slowly, haltingly, but it looks like it's going there. And we have one question from the audience here about delivery. And I don't know if this is true or not. It says, I see stickers around town on cars for ZAH. I think it's Z-A-H. Is that right? Someone said. It's a delivery service. Is this legal delivery of cannabis? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, that would be an illegal delivery of cannabis.
Yeah, but let's just say someday we have a retail market for cannabis. One of the sticking points in the legislature in 2021 was this desire on the part of lawmakers who were sponsoring the retail adult market was to use the allotment, I guess, of licenses for small businesses to sort of address and rectify sort of a pattern of overzealous prosecution and arrest of minority groups over the years for marijuana crimes. And in other words, to make it so you'd have some I don't know if affirmative action is the right word, but you'd have some way to level the playing field there. And that was a sticking point, didn't happen. But if we have a retail market, maybe each of you can address this in your own way. How soon do you think that might happen? Will there be accommodations made to sort of look at sort of past grievances, legitimate grievances by people who are, maybe even incarcerated for possession or dealing, because this has happened in other states. And if that market occurs, is it going to look like the market in California, Colorado, or is it going to be in more of a Virginia way? Because we were the first southern state to legalize marijuana, and the only southern state so far to do that. Would it be much more sort of strictly regulated the way that Trent's stores are? So we can start with you, Jeremy, but I'd just like you to each talk about when are we going to get a retail market and what's it going to be?
Real easy question. I actually think it's very unlikely that the next legislature will be able to pass a bill creating a retail market that gets signed into law by the governor or is allowed to take effect without signature. In other words, I would think it would be a replay of what took place very recently here at the end of March. So that puts it out at least a year for it being adopted. I think in the next couple of years, 2-3 years, you will have legislation passed that would create a retail market. If that's a personal view, that's not a CCA view. Just kind of reading the political tea leaves. I hasten to add, though, that it takes a while to stand up a market. From the perspective of a regulator, from the perspective of people who are going to be growing, people who are going to be licensed. So, even the legislation that was created, that was adopted by the legislature and vetoed by Governor Youngkin, that didn't have retail sales happening until in full until 2025. So I think it will take some time. What it will look like, I think there's a broad consensus on being inclusive. And I think that what that means is not only would you ensure representation from people whose lives were turned upside down as a result of disproportionate policing during the time of Prohibition, but it would also be inclusive with respect to people who are economically disadvantaged, didn't face any prosecution or enforcement in the time of Prohibition, but are just economically disadvantaged. I think there's a view in Virginia that this could be an opportunity for folks, distressed farmers, for example, other people who are not part of the rising tide. So I do think you will have an inclusive industry ultimately, number of years down the road, that accommodates all these people who have been put or are in disadvantaged situations, to include those who are disproportionately policed. And candidly, I mean, that's not a political view, that's established fact. I mean, there was disproportionate enforcement of the laws against people of color.
So would you anticipate the same level of sort of strict quality control that exists now for the medical market?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, there were laboratories who are not in the Virginia market, independent laboratories who would be licensed by us, who were chomping at the bit, waiting to get in to the adult use retail market if it were stood up. Because right now we really only have one laboratory operational in Virginia to do the independent testing to ensure the rigorous quality that Trent discussed earlier.
So Bob Nealon, what's your prediction as to when this may happen and what it will look like?
Well,
That's a good question, and one of the things that people don't realize is, and not that I'm advocating for the industry, but because of the federal legislation that prohibits federal bank institutions and federal agencies to authorize cannabis activity, it's a real impediment to the industry. So until that's changed, it's going to be hard to see a large initiative where companies are going to invest a lot of money, particularly in Virginia at this time, because there's some statistics out there that the average company is taxed overall about 70%. And that's because there's a code section, Internal Revenue Code section 26 USC 280E, which prevents cannabis companies from deducting normal expenses. So they're taxed on the gross profit without calculating net income. And what does that mean? The cost of the actual product they can deduct, but all the expenses, advertising, some salaries, professional fees, other normal business expenses, entertainment, those things aren't allowed to be deducted. So at the federal level, they have a huge impediment to operating normal business activities when you're in the cannabis space. In addition, there's a lot of reluctance to assist a cannabis business because of the concern they might be sanctioned at the federal level to some extent. So, having told you that, right now the Biden administration is pushing heavily to change all this. And the cannabis lobby at the federal level, and I do a lot of work at the federal level, there's huge effort now to do away with Section 280E and other federal restrictions which are holding the cannabis industry back. If that happens and these laws change at the federal level, you're going to see a lot of economic pressure to come into Virginia and all the other states. And I believe we have 39 states now that have some form of lawful cannabis use. So as soon as that changes at the federal level, you're going to see a lot more economic activity, which will include more investment. And so I think that's an issue that should be considered at the state level.
So Trent, your company has one foot in the door, so to speak, on this with the medical dispensaries. So how much bigger could your business be with a retail market for adults? I mean, what does that look like for you, and when do you think it's going to happen?
Yeah, look, we're investing in Virginia today. The company has spent $100 million to date investment in Virginia. So that's in Manassas, Sterling, Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Woodbridge. We have over 300 employees that all have careers in cannabis now, healthcare, 401k, all the fun stuff. That quadruples overnight. So Jeremy, the CCA explodes, so does our business. There's only 4 operators in the state. The CCA is working on getting a 5th into the health service area that's down south and out west. And so there's at max 36 stores in the state. That's not enough. That's not even remotely close to enough.
Why do you say that?
So depending on how you look at it, that's a very limited number. In Illinois, for example, they used 1 store for every 300,000 people, and that seems to be a very well regulated market industry. They have about 13 million people. They have about 170 stores. They've bumped that up recently to about 250. And you don't see a street or a cannabis store on every street corner. I come out of Colorado. I'll be the first to admit they were rubber stamping everybody. We had too many stores. The market has shook out since then. That's not the case anymore. But what is going to be put into place in the Commonwealth is going to be nowhere close to that. We've learned a lot over the last 10 years of regulating adult use cannabis. We know what that looks like. And going back to your question, that additional however many stores are going to go to folks that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. It's going to go to people that are economically disadvantaged, so above the state poverty line, below the income level. And so I think those have been bills that have been proposed by the legislature for the last 2-3 years now, that have unfortunately been either quietly killed or very publicly killed. And so the good news about the industry, we aren't going anywhere. I think that's the misunderstanding. The regulated industry is not going anywhere. And just to make it very clear, there is a retail cannabis marketplace in Virginia. It's just not regulated and it's just not taxed. I walked here from about half a mile down on King Street. I walked into 2 stores. I could buy cannabis in 2 stores. 2 stores. Now I know what to ask for, and I know what I'm looking for, but that's a retail storefront. And so it's here. I can jump on my phone and get cannabis delivered here faster than Domino's Pizza. I'll also take that bet if anybody wants to do that. The problem is that's not regulated. It's not taxed. It's not tested. And so I think it's a major disservice that the governor, quite frankly, has took it upon himself to make that decision, to say, I know better than the majority, 70% of the people in my state, in my Commonwealth. And so I'm a little bit different. I'm a little bit more glass half full guy. We're still not even done yet this year. The governor hasn't signed a budget yet. So, let's not even throw this one yet to the wolves. But also, we have all of summer, all of fall, all of winter to educate Republicans what the problem is within this state. Last year, the industry didn't have that chance because everybody was running for re-election in November. And so I'm going to take the stance of we're going to do our job. We're going to educate people. And, hopefully this time next year, we'll have 17 Republicans on side in the legislature, in the House, and we're going to have 6 Republican senators on side in the House. Governor can't do anything about that. So
Trent, are you saying that right now pretty much the support for the market is among only Democrats? I mean, weren't there some Republicans who voted for the 2021 legislation?
Well, I don't know about the 2020 legislation. I don't remember that. I'm pretty sure that was straight partisan vote. Yep. Yeah. That was a very interesting process. We'll leave that one to the side. We did have a few Republicans vote for it this time, but maybe onesie twosies. But again, we know what the legislator is going to look like this time next year, coming into session, which is very different than what it was this year. So hopefully people realize that people want to have the ability to choose what to do with themselves that are over the age of 21, and that's going to help make sure we regulate and tax, create careers, and quite frankly make a marketplace that's already here in the Commonwealth.
Thanks, Trent. And Brian, so in your view, legal market, what does that do, if there were one, to easing the burden on the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, or would it not really have much of an effect?
I think with time it would have an effect. I come at it from the position of public safety, right? And that's the real concern. I mean, we've had homicides that are related to the illicit marijuana trade in the city of Alexandria. And sometimes that shocks legislators to hear that. So anything that could take away from the illicit trade, by extension, would be good for public safety, in my opinion. We've already made the decision as a Commonwealth that we're going to have limited legalization of marijuana. So now we're kind of like stuck in this limbo land where it's really not, it's not tenable moving forward, in my opinion. And of course, what I would like to do is to see that illicit market erode and erode and erode with time, so that we get to a point where we're dealing with, illicit drugs like fentanyl and that kind of dealing. So I do think it can help with public safety. I don't think it will be overnight. I would say, I just wanted to say as an aside before I leave, I think it's kind of funny that the banks won't deal, because they seem to be pretty willing to look the other way when guys come in with $9,900 in cash and put it into an account which moves $1.4 million over 1 year and is deposited in Virginia and immediately withdrawn the next day in California. But leave that aside. So I do support the idea. I do think it will help. I don't think it will be an overnight success, but I do think with time, other states have shown that the illicit market is eroded, and that would be a benefit to public safety.
Okay. We're just about at our normal quitting time of 8:15. But there's one question that's kind of a fun question that one of our attendees asked, and that is, how did the state arrive at a 4-plant limit? I mean, what's the point of 4 plants versus 5 or 10 or 3? I mean, was that just sort of political horse trading, or in Germany?
Yeah, my understanding is that was seen as not too low, not too high, kind of a Goldilocks middle option.
That actually comes from Colorado. In Colorado, when we first legalized adult use, we had 4 plants per person in a household. That got a little bit out of hand. We talk about the 99 plants as the cap. And so we learned our lesson. Colorado learned their lesson. There is a wonderful person that works at the CCA. She didn't pay me to say that because she is wonderful. She comes out of Colorado with me. And so I think that was one lesson learned.
She came after
Yeah.
the legislator spoke. There were instances where there were, states had 2, states had more than 4, and I do think my understanding is they weren't looking at Colorado, to be honest. And Sean, who you mentioned, she came 2 years after the legislation was enacted. But I think, and it's very strictly limited. I mean, it's per residence. It's not, there are 4 adults living here, so 4 times 4, it's 16 plants. No. The other thing is that it preserves a landlord's right to tell you can't grow there, and you can't use on the rented property if that's what they want to do, if that's their preference. There's no law against them doing that.
Well, some states have regulated the size of the canopy on the trees, the plants, I should say. Some of them are trees.
But that's for processors and retailers. It's not for individuals in their.
Well, I think some states have taken that approach.
For canopies, but
Yeah.
again, that's not for individuals at their houses.
Okay, well.
Yeah, that's
I-
yeah,
Well, no,
it's different.
Actually, I'm aware of some states that have that on the home use canopy restrictions. So there's all kinds of statutes out there.
Well, thank you all on behalf of Jen Alexandria for coming here tonight and shedding some light on this really messy situation. It sounds like you don't know how to process a ticket. There's no standard for THC when you're driving. There's no retail market. You can have seeds, but you can't buy seeds. I mean, it's just it really is messy. But I know a lot more personally myself, and I hope all of you do. If your friends and neighbors want to watch this, it'll be available on YouTube tomorrow at no charge on our website. But anyway, let's give our panelists a hand. It was a really nice discussion. Thank you.
This is Agenda Alexandria, a nonpartisan organization that takes a look at the issues without taking sides. Whether it's the city's sewer system, education, public safety, climate change, or perhaps a look back into Alexandria's history, Agenda Alexandria is here to shine a light. What makes the organization so successful is our people. The people who run it, our panelists, our moderators, and of course, our members. Agenda Alexandria is a member-funded organization, and we invite you to become one today by visiting agendaalexandria.org.